Wisteria Heights was not a place you simply moved to. It was a destiny you inherited or married into. I, Elara, had done the latter, stepping out of the bright chaos of Boston and into the hushed, manicured perfection of this exclusive coastal Massachusetts enclave 4 years ago, married to Liam Vance, a scion of one of the founding families. Yet, 4 years felt like 4 days, or perhaps 4 centuries, because the air here, thick with old money and older judgment, never truly let me breathe. The sense of belonging remained perpetually out of reach, like a silk gown too exquisite to touch. The Vance estate, Ariel's Point, was magnificent, a sprawling grey-shingled mansion overlooking a treacherous stretch of the Atlantic. It was a monument to Liam's ancestors, built on the profits of shipbuilding and, if the local whispers were to be believed, a fair bit of smuggling back in the Prohibition era. But even within its formidable stone walls, I felt like a visitor, a temporary tenant waiting for an eviction notice that could arrive with the next turn of the tide. Tonight, the annual summer solstice gala, hosted at the Wisteria Heights Club, served as the year's definitive social litmus test. It was here, amidst crystal glasses and priceless antiques, that the unspoken hierarchy was rigidly reinforced. I stood near a marble fountain, adjusting the diamond necklace Liam had gifted me, feeling the weight of the scrutiny more than the sparkle of the gems. Every look was a survey, every smile a calculation. I watched the matriarchs of the town, the formidable Mrs. Albright, Mrs. Sterling, and Mrs. Hawthorne, cluster near the oyster bar, their voices dropping to conspiratorial murmurs whenever I passed. Their collective disapproval was a palpable energy, a humid, suffocating blanket that only I seemed to feel. Liam, oblivious or perhaps willfully ignoring the temperature of the room, was across the hall, deep in conversation about municipal bonds with 2 junior partners. He was handsome, commanding, and impeccably suited, everything Wisteria Heights expected a Vance to be. He loved me, in his structured, reliable way, but his love offered no shield against the traditions of his birthright. His loyalty lay ultimately with the club, with the lineage, with the legacy. My lack of lineage was a perpetual flaw, a stain on his perfect canvas. My past, a relatively simple upbringing in a university town, was routinely, and subtly, used against me. Elara, dear, you wouldn't understand the complexities of the deed restrictions, Mrs. Albright might coo, while Mrs. Sterling would comment loudly, such a vibrant color. We rarely see such bold choices here, but then, some people do prefer to stand out. I had learned to smile, nod, and retreat into the cool detachment of my own mind. I became an expert observer, tracking the silent cues and the deadly grace of their social fencing. I knew which fork to use, which topic to avoid, and precisely when to refill my champagne glass to signal the appropriate level of elegant boredom. Yet, I was tired of playing a role, tired of the unending audition. The man who truly embodied the town's prejudice was Kai Sterling. His family, the Sterlings, were the keepers of the club's history and the most vocal about maintaining the purity of Wisteria Heights. Kai was Liam's contemporary, but where Liam was reserved, Kai was volatile, an aggressive gatekeeper obsessed with who belonged and, more importantly, who didn't. He was currently making his way toward me, cutting a path through the throng of guests like a shark through a school of lesser fish. His jaw was tight, his eyes locked on mine with a specific, chilling intensity that promised confrontation. I felt my stomach clench, a familiar knot of dread tightening with every step he took closer. I took a breath, trying to summon the confidence that my husband's name should grant me, but the name felt foreign even on my own tongue. I braced myself, knowing this was not going to be a polite exchange about the price of waterfront property or the state of the yacht club's new mooring lines. This was personal, and Kai had the look of a man who intended to draw blood, socially speaking, of course. The music, a pleasant but forgettable Vivaldi concerto, seemed to fade into a dramatic silence just as he reached me. He didn't offer a greeting, didn't acknowledge the ring on my finger or the family crest on the wine bottle I held. He simply stopped, his presence a wall of hostile energy, and glared. This annual gathering, designed to celebrate the enduring success of the community, felt, to me, like an interrogation under the harshest spotlight. I knew that whatever he was about to say, it would be designed to cut deep, leaving an invisible but painful scar. The tension in the air was so thick you could almost see the sparks flying between us, all the suppressed hostility of the past 4 years finally coalescing into this single, inescapable moment. I managed a tight, polite smile, the last vestige of my social armor. "Kai. A lovely evening, isn't it?" I offered, knowing how ridiculous the pleasantry sounded, a fragile whisper against his obvious rage. He responded with a sound that was less a laugh and more a sneer, confirming my worst fears about his intent. Kai Sterling did not waste time on preamble. The moment I finished my hollow pleasantry, he leaned in, his voice cutting through the gentle hum of the party, sharp enough to turn heads. His eyes, usually cool and calculating, were ablaze with a cold fury that seemed disproportionate to any transgression I could have committed. I had merely existed, which, for him, seemed transgression enough. "The evening is perfect," he hissed, his lips barely moving, except for the blatant intrusion. He took a quick, aggressive step closer, forcing me to hold my ground or appear to flee. "Do you really think that diamond necklace and Liam's name make up for the deficiency? Do you believe you belong here?" My smile flickered, replaced by a defensive wall. "I am Liam's wife, Kai. I believe that settles the matter of my attendance." My voice, surprisingly steady, carried the crispness of a woman who had practiced this response in her mind 100 times. I willed my hands, clutching the stem of my glass, not to tremble. He laughed then, a short, sharp, theatrical sound that drew the attention of the matriarchs across the room, who paused their conversation and tilted their heads, eager for the spectacle. "Liam's wife. A beautiful title, but a temporary one, Ilara. You are a transplant, a placeholder, a foreign body in the very heart of this community, and you contaminate every gathering you attend." His words struck with the force of a physical blow, publicly validating every insecurity I had harbored since moving here. The air felt thin, suffocatingly so. I looked for Liam, but he was still preoccupied with his junior partners, miles away in his own insulated world of finance, completely unaware of the public execution occurring just yards away. Kai noticed my glance and smirked, knowing he had isolated his target. "Don't bother looking for protection. Liam knows the rules. He made his choice, but that doesn't change our choice." He leaned in further, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and raw hostility. This was the moment. This was the verbal sword thrust he had been building toward all evening, all year. Then, he yelled it. The phrase that contained all the suppressed resentment of the founding families, the phrase meant to mark me permanently, indelibly, as an outcast, "You're not one of us." The sound was jarring, echoing off the high ceilings of the club's ballroom, causing an immediate, dead silence to fall over the 50 or so guests present. Every single eye snapped to me, condemning, curious, or secretly pleased. My face burned with a shame so intense it felt physical, like a fever. For a terrifying moment, I wanted to drop my glass and run, disappear into the dark Atlantic waters below, or simply vaporize on the spot. I felt my carefully constructed composure crumble, and the truth of his words, that I was and always would be an outsider, threatened to overwhelm me. The silence was broken only by the distant, rhythmic crash of the waves against the cliff. Kai stood triumphant, chest heaving slightly, basking in the shocked, yet ultimately supportive, silence of his peers. He had done what they all wanted to do, publicly sever the thread that connected me to their exclusive tapestry. Just as the matriarchs began to move, their faces set in expressions of smug pity, ready to sweep in and escort me gracefully, or ungracefully, off the premises, a noise interrupted the scene. It was the sharp clack-clack-clack of a cane hitting the Italian marble floor, approaching rapidly from the club entrance. Everyone, including Kai, turned their heads. The club entrance was suddenly occupied by a figure none of us had expected. Mr. Alistair Thorne. Alistair Thorne was a legend in Wisteria Heights, the oldest and wealthiest surviving member of the original founding council, a reclusive figure who hadn't been seen in public for at least a decade, allegedly confined to his colossal, Gothic estate on the far side of the peninsula. He was supported by a young aide, but his presence commanded attention. He was frail, ancient, and dressed in a perfectly tailored, old-fashioned tuxedo that seemed to belong to another century. But it was his eyes that froze the room. They were sharp, intensely blue, and instantly assessed the entire unfolding situation. Kai's expression, seconds earlier one of vicious triumph, evaporated into utter horror. He went bone white, looking like a little boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar by the stern headmaster. He visibly shrank under the gaze of Alistair Thorne. And then, Alistair Thorne did something inexplicable. He ignored Kai entirely, looked directly at me, Ilara Vance, and began to move toward me with slow, deliberate steps, his cane echoing in the profound silence. When he arrived, everyone froze. The matriarchs stopped their movement, Liam finally looked up from his conversation, and the entire room became a tableau of stunned, motionless witnesses. Alistair Thorne moved with the gravity of a man who owned not just the room, but the very ground Wisteria Heights stood upon. His entrance was a seismic event, and his slow, measured approach towards me felt like the inevitable collision of past and present. The silence, which had been broken by Kai's shout, was now 10 times heavier, thick with anticipation and terror. Kai Sterling, who seconds before had possessed the arrogance of a crowned prince, was now visibly shaking. He tried to speak, perhaps to offer an explanation or an apology to the imposing elder, but only a dry, rattling sound escaped his throat. The matriarchs looked equally horrified, their faces etched with a fear of ancient power they thought had long been retired. Alistair reached Kai, but instead of stopping, he merely used the young man's shoulder for a brief, steadying moment before continuing his trajectory toward me. The slight touch seemed to burn Kai, who stumbled back half a step, completely displaced from his moment of victory. The elder man finally stopped directly in front of me, his height, even slightly stooped, giving him an undeniable presence. He took a long moment to study my face, his intense blue eyes seeming to look past the surface, past my momentary shame, and deep into something else entirely. It wasn't a look of judgment, it was one of profound, searching recognition. I didn't flinch, didn't drop my gaze, even though every nerve in my body was screaming at me to run. I met his stare with a kind of weary defiance, the last shred of dignity I possessed. If he was here to confirm Kai's cruel verdict, I would at least face it standing tall. Alistair Thorne's gaze shifted to the back of my neck, where the clasp of Liam's diamond necklace rested, then down to my hand, where my wedding band sparkled. He seemed to take inventory of my acquired status before dismissing it all with a slow shake of his head. He raised a liver-spotted, trembling hand. I automatically tensed, expecting a slap or a stern finger pointing me toward the door. Instead, his hand gently reached out, bypassing the necklace, and lightly touched the pearl earring I wore, a simple heirloom passed down from my grandmother, the only piece of jewelry I truly cherished. His voice, when it finally came, was a raspy whisper, yet in the suffocating silence, it sounded like a thunderclap. It held the texture of old leather and forgotten secrets. "The eyes of Ilara," he murmured, his thumb brushing my earlobe. "The same sharp angles, the same defiance." He slowly straightened, turning his back on me to face the frozen audience, which included my now approaching and bewildered husband, Liam. Liam had finally registered the chaos and the presence of Mr. Thorne. "Kai Sterling, you fool," Alistair stated, his voice now gaining a surprising strength. "Did you truly believe the matter was so simple? That mere marriage or wealth determines who is one of us?" Kai stammered, "Mr. Thorne, I merely meant, she's not." "Silence," Alistair commanded. "You meant to assert Sterling dominance over a Vance marriage, a petty, modern squabble. You entirely missed the foundation of the issue. You mistook the vessel for the very contents it holds." He turned back to me, taking my hand gently, a gesture of profound respect that instantly elevated me in the eyes of every witness. My hand felt small and insignificant in his ancient grip, yet secure, as if anchored by centuries of history. "Elara Vance," Alistair announced, not as a judgment, but as a solemn decree to the room. "You may be new to this club, and new to the name Vance, but you are not new to Wisteria Heights. You are merely forgotten." He let go of my hand, but the effect of the touch lingered, a physical residue of power. "Liam," he called out to my stunned husband. "You married well, perhaps better than you know. Better than any of us knew, until now." He paused, looking over the silent, shocked faces of the matriarchs. He smiled, a thin, almost predatory expression. "This young woman, whom you so casually dismissed, is the key. She is the forgotten bloodline. The truth has merely been buried deep beneath the legalities and the land deeds for too long." He looked at me one last time, a twinkle of mischief in his blue eyes, and then, with the help of his aide, Alistair Thorne turned and began his slow, clacking exit, leaving the entire gala, including me, in absolute, reeling silence. The music did not resume. The party was definitively over. The moment Alistair Thorne's figure disappeared through the club doors, the frozen tableau shattered, not into conversation, but into pandemonium. It was a silent pandemonium, a chaos of frantic, whispered reassessments and terrified, sideways glances. Everyone was talking without speaking, their faces performing a rapid-fire calculation of social risk and reward. Liam was the first to reach me, his face a mixture of confusion and sudden, proprietorial pride. "Elara, what in God's name was that? Thorne hasn't left his house in 10 years. What did he mean, forgotten bloodline?" He grabbed my arm, his grip too tight, not comforting, but demanding answers I didn't possess. I gently pulled my arm away, still numb from the public spectacle. "I have no idea, Liam. I was as shocked as you were. I just stood here, being executed by Kai, until Mr. Thorne intervened." Kai Sterling, pale and disheveled, stood alone near the fountain, completely abandoned by his peers who were now desperately trying to look busy or invisible. The matriarchs were huddled together, their whispers no longer conspiratorial about me, but frantic about the implications of Thorne's pronouncement. The center of the storm had shifted. The next day, Wisteria Heights was consumed by a silence more ominous than the social frost of the previous years. The phones must have been buzzing off the hook, but outwardly, the town maintained a facade of perfect, unnerving tranquility. No one called, no one visited, and the usual stream of social invitations dried up entirely. We were, suddenly, quarantined by curiosity and fear. Liam was restless. Alistair Thorne's intervention had given my social status a supernova boost, but it had introduced a terrifying element of the unknown into Liam's carefully structured life. His inheritance was tied to the town's land covenants, documents that were legendary for their complexity and rigidity. Any talk of a forgotten bloodline was a direct threat to the established order and, potentially, to his own holdings. "It must be a mistake," Liam argued over breakfast, pacing our grand, empty dining room. "The old man is senile. He hasn't managed his own affairs in years. He's confusing you with someone else." He looked me in the eye. "Liam," I countered, buttering a piece of toast with unnatural calm. He touched my grandmother's earring and spoke of defiance. He knew exactly who I was and who I represented. The conviction in my voice surprised even me. I realized then that this was no longer about winning acceptance. It was about solving a mystery. My own mystery. I had always accepted the narrative of my simple past, my single mother, the small university town, but Alistair Thorne had cracked the foundation of that narrative with a single sentence. That afternoon, I began my own investigation. The Vance estate contained a formidable library dedicated entirely to local history, a requirement for any proper founding family. I started with the most obscure, dust-covered volumes, the ones Liam's financial mind would never touch. I searched for the name Elara, for the sharp angles Alistair had mentioned, and for any reference to a forgotten or hidden family. I found nothing conclusive, only long lists of names and dates, lineages that meticulously tracked every marriage and birth but abruptly ended decades ago in certain branches. It was like looking at a meticulously drawn family tree where someone had violently ripped off one major branch, leaving a jagged tear. One name kept reappearing, mentioned only in footnotes and legal codicils: the Eldridge line. They were apparently the original landholders of the entire peninsula, predating the Vances, Sterlings, and Albrights. The Eldridge fortune had seemingly dissolved overnight, leaving only vague legal language about a dormant claim. Liam was becoming increasingly nervous about my research. He saw it not as a chance for us to gain power, but as a risk to his existing stability. "Elara, stop digging. If there's something to find, my lawyers will find it. You're stirring up trouble where there was only a harmless, if embarrassing, blunder by Kai." "Harmless?" I scoffed, closing a heavy book, sending a puff of fine dust into the air. "Liam, the man who runs this town just risked his entire reputation to humiliate me, and the man who built this town risked his life to stop him. This is not harmless." I felt a surge of adrenaline, realizing I was no longer merely Liam's wife, trying to fit in. I was an active player in a high-stakes, generational game, and the goal had changed from acceptance to understanding. The silence of Wisteria Heights was now a sound of its own, the sound of secrets desperately trying to stay buried. The entire town was waiting for me to make the next move, and I intended to deliver. My focus shifted entirely to the Eldridge line. The more I read, the more I understood that they weren't just a former family. They were a systemic absence, a deliberate, collective omission from Wisteria Heights' polite history. Their massive land holdings had been absorbed by the other founding families in a series of extremely complicated transactions in the 1930s. I eventually found a small, leather-bound volume, hidden behind a shelf of Victorian poetry, titled The Covenant. It was not a legal document, but a journal kept by an early Vance patriarch. The handwriting was archaic, the ink faded, but the words were clear enough to follow. The patriarch wrote of the Eldridges as a family blessed by the sea, but cursed by the coin. The last entry, dated 1935, spoke of a final partitioning and a seal of silence placed upon the remaining heir, to protect the last bloom from the winter frost. The most significant entry was a drawing, a crudely sketched crest, featuring a flowering vine, wisteria, specifically, wrapped around a simple, unadorned pearl. Underneath, a single phrase, "Ad hoc vivo, I still live." The pearl. My grandmother's earring. The one Alistair Thorne had touched. My heart hammered against my ribs. This couldn't be a coincidence. My grandmother had always been vague about the earring's origin, saying only that it was a reminder to stay sharp and never bow. Later that evening, as I was examining the sketch again, a noise outside the library window startled me. I looked up to see a dark sedan idling silently near the edge of the estate, its headlights off. It felt like an intrusion, a deliberate act of surveillance that broke the illusion of our privileged security. The following morning, I received a cryptic, anonymous envelope in the mail. It contained only 2 items: a photograph of a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to me, the same sharp chin, the same intense eyes, and a folded newspaper clipping from 1936. The clipping was a brief obituary for a Mrs. Lillian Eldridge, last of her line, noting her passing in a small, quiet town far from Wisteria Heights. The photograph was clearly of Lillian. My breath hitched. The small town listed in the obituary was the very university town where I had grown up. That afternoon, I drove to the town's small, historic cemetery, ostensibly to visit a long-forgotten family plot. As I walked between the moss-covered headstones, I noticed a familiar figure, Kai Sterling, dressed in a dark suit, leaning against a large oak tree nearby, clearly waiting for me. My blood ran cold. The hostility I felt was mixed with a newfound determination. I was no longer afraid of his opinion, I was wary of his intent. He approached me slowly, his usual arrogance replaced by a strange, almost pleading desperation. "You're not supposed to be here," he whispered urgently, looking around as if afraid of being overheard by the silent dead. "You're getting too close, Elara. This isn't about me or Liam or the club anymore. This is dangerous." I stood my ground, my voice firm. "You're the one who started this, Kai. You yelled that I wasn't one of you. Now tell me what that meant. Who am I?" He shook his head, his eyes haunted. "The man who yelled 'You're not one of us' was protecting the very last fragments of this town's soul from the Vances. He was a fool, a loud-mouthed idiot, but he wasn't wrong about the risk." "The risk of what?" I pressed, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. "The risk of who I am." "The risk of them knowing you're here, Elara," he insisted, running a frustrated hand through his hair. "The risk of you realizing the truth about the land deeds. Just stop. Go back to being Liam's pretty wife. It's safe, and frankly, it's what's expected." Expected by whom? By the people who buried my ancestor in a quiet town far away and thought they'd extinguished her line. I challenged, holding his gaze. The anger I felt was righteous, fueled by decades of silence and intentional obfuscation. He looked genuinely terrified. "The man who arrives next won't be as kind as Alistair Thorne was. They are watching you, Elara. They know you have the scent of the Eldridge money. Go home. Now." Kai's warning was not a threat from a rival, but a genuine plea from a panicked accomplice. He was trying to push me away from a secret that was clearly much bigger and far more perilous than a simple social slight. The whole community, I realized, was sitting on a foundation of lies, and I was about to drill into the bedrock. Kai's terrified warning only cemented my resolve. His desperation was the strongest confirmation I needed. Alistair Thorne was not senile, and the Eldridge name was not merely historical. It was the active, volatile center of Wisteria Heights fear. I left the cemetery not with fear, but with a cold, clear-eyed anger. I returned to the Vance Library, abandoning the vague historical texts for legal documents. I searched through old property transfers, probate records, and, most importantly, the founding charter of the Wisteria Heights Club itself. Liam, sensing my withdrawal and preoccupation, had become moody and distant, retreating into his own world of late-night phone calls and closed-door meetings with his lawyers. The club charter, dated 1905, was a meticulously crafted document, establishing the club as the centralized governing body for the community, owning all common areas, regulating architectural standards, and controlling all coastal access. I focused on the section dealing with the land acquisition. It detailed the purchase of land from the 5 founding families. But the section dealing with the 6th, and largest, parcel, the Eldridge land, was different. It wasn't a purchase, it was a lease-to-own covenant, contingent upon the failure of the Eldridge bloodline. The terms were deliberately convoluted, filled with vague clauses about perpetual dormancy and blood equity. The key detail was a specific date, a review period set for 100 years after the covenant was signed. I did the quick math, 1936 plus 100 years. The review date was set for this coming November. We were only 4 months away. The implications were staggering. The Vances, Sterlings, Albrights, and others didn't own the core of Wisteria Heights. They were, in a very complicated way, renting it. And the lease was about to expire, pending a review of the Eldridge bloodline. That night, Liam confronted me, walking into the library where I was surrounded by stacks of yellowed documents. "Elara, this has to stop. The Albrights called. They're worried about your sudden interest in everything. You're making them nervous." "Good," I replied, without looking up, my voice flat. "I hope I am." "Elara," he exploded. "I built this life for us. Do you know what my father went through to consolidate the Vance holdings? It was a struggle for power, not an archaeological dig. Don't jeopardize our stability for some romanticized notion of a forgotten past. I finally looked at him, my eyes hard. Your stability is built on a century-long lie, Liam. Your family didn't buy the land, they leased it. And the lease is up. I pointed to the covenant. Tell me you didn't know about the Eldridge line. His composure cracked. He didn't deny it. It's a legal formality. A deadline. They vanished. My father spent decades making sure the records were managed. It's an insurance policy the club holds, a contingency that will never be realized. It was never meant to be a problem. But it is a problem now, I whispered, holding up the photograph of Lillian Eldridge. Because the forgotten bloodline still lives. And she had a daughter, who had a daughter, my mother. I am the remaining heir, Liam. I am the contingency. He stared at the photograph, then at me, the blood draining from his face. The reality of Alistair Thorne's cryptic intervention, and Kai's desperate warning, slammed into him. He didn't see his wife anymore. He saw a colossal, multi-generational lawsuit. This is impossible, he murmured, sinking into a leather chair, all his powerful energy suddenly drained. You need to destroy those documents, Elara. This must not get out. The club will crush us. They'll crush you. The club is about to find out that the woman they tried to exclude, the outsider, is the woman who actually holds the title to their gilded cage, I stated, feeling a terrifying calm settle over me. I need to find Alistair Thorne. He knows the full story. My investigation had just shifted from digging in the dirt to confronting the Oracle. Arranging a visit to Alistair Thorne's estate, the Citadel, was impossible through formal channels. He was untouchable, guarded by layers of staff and a legendary reluctance to meet anyone. But Wisteria Heights was founded on old debts and personal favors, and I knew that sometimes, the most impenetrable locks could be opened with the simplest key. I didn't go through Liam, who was still paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the discovery, nor did I use his legal team, who were frantically trying to discredit the old covenant. I went through Mrs. Albright. I found her at the local art museum, ostensibly admiring a new acquisition. I walked straight up to her, bypassing her stunned aide. Mrs. Albright, I said, my voice low and firm. I know about the Eldridge Covenant. I know about the review date in November. And I know you and Mr. Thorne share a history. Her face, usually a mask of patrician composure, showed a flicker of raw panic. Elara, I have no idea what nonsense Liam has filled your head with. I have the original covenant and the Eldridge obituary. I cut in, maintaining unwavering eye contact. I am the bloodline, Mrs. Albright. And I will find out the full truth about the partitioning, with or without your help. But if you help me, I will consider your family's history of cooperation when the covenant comes due. The threat was subtle but devastatingly clear. I was offering her a chance to be on the winning side, or at least, the surviving side. She looked at me with a newfound respect mixed with terror. I can't take you there, Elara. I can only make a call. The rest is up to him. 2 hours later, a sleek, black Rolls-Royce with tinted windows arrived at Ariel's Point. The driver did not speak, he simply held the door open. I left Liam a short note, going to the Citadel. Don't call the lawyers yet, Dad, and stepped into the car, feeling like I was boarding a ferry to the underworld. The Citadel lived up to its name. It was perched on the highest, most isolated point of the peninsula, a massive, brooding structure of granite and darkwood, surrounded by ancient, tangled rhododendrons. The air here was cooler, stiller, weighted with deep history. Alistair Thorne was waiting for me in a small, windowless study lined with books, maps, and maritime artifacts. He sat behind a large mahogany desk, looking frail but utterly sovereign. The aide from the party stood silently in the corner. Mrs. Vance, he greeted me, his voice less brittle than it had been at the club. Or should I say, Miss Eldridge, in spirit. I ignored the pleasantries. Mr. Thorne, I have the covenant. I know about the lease to own. I need to know why. Why the partitioning, why the silence, and why my family was erased. He leaned back, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. It was not erasure, Ilara. It was protection. The Eldridge fortune was not money, it was the land. And the land held a secret that the others coveted. They couldn't steal it, they had to wait for the bloodline to fail. He told me the story. The Eldridges, unlike the other founding families, made their initial wealth not from trade, but from a rare, naturally occurring mineral found only in the soil of Wisteria Heights, a mineral critical for early industrial applications. The others, the Vances and Sterlings, saw the mineral as a way to power their own factories. The Eldridge matriarch, your great-grandmother, was wise. She knew the greed of the others. She agreed to the lease but placed the condition of the bloodline on the deed, a legal failsafe that ensured the land would revert if her line ever returned to reclaim it. He paused, taking a sip of water. But the others couldn't wait. They manipulated her husband, claiming the mineral was running out, that the family was bankrupt. They forced her into the covenant. When she realized the betrayal, she took her young daughter, changed her name to Lillian, and fled, disappearing entirely from the records, taking a single, crucial thing with her. The earring, I whispered, touching the pearl on my ear. No, Ilara. Not the pearl. That was a sentimental token. She took the map, Alistair stated, his blue eyes gleaming. The actual geological map that proves the mineral reserves are not depleted. They are simply located in one single, precise spot, directly beneath the Wisteria Heights Club itself. The gasp I let out was barely audible, but it hung in the air, cold and heavy. I spent the next hour absorbing the staggering implication of Alistair Thorne's confession. The entire community, the club, the wealth, and the social hierarchy, it was all a century-long act of real estate fraud, built over a secret gold mine. The founding families hadn't just wanted the land, they wanted the untold wealth beneath the exact spot where they had built their exclusive sanctuary. They built the club precisely there to control the resource, not to celebrate the landscape, Alistair confirmed, leaning forward. They needed the building and the charter to prevent any private development or drilling. The club is the perfect, permanent blockade. And Kai? I asked, finally understanding the source of his venom. Kai Sterling is the most devoted, and arguably the most dangerous, of the current generation's gatekeepers, Alistair explained. He watches the covenant date, he manages the legal shielding, and he ensures no one, especially an outsider, gets close to the truth. When he saw you, Ilara, an unknown outsider who married into the Vance name, thereby gaining access to the library and the deeds, he panicked. He didn't want you to contaminate the bloodline, he wanted you away from the club's records. Alistair looked genuinely troubled. And Liam? Your husband? I took a deep breath, the truth a bitter taste in my mouth. Liam knew about the covenant, but dismissed it as a dead contingency. He was complicit in the silence, not the initial theft. He saw the truth as a threat to his established stability. Stability, Alistair echoed sadly. That is the price of Wisteria Heights, Ilara. A century of silent agreement to suppress the truth. My family, the Thornes, never benefited directly from the mineral, but we benefited from the stability that silence provided. I regret my compliance, which is why I intervened at the gala. He pointed to a large, rolled-up parchment secured by a ribbon on a high shelf. That is the real threat. It's the original Eldridge survey map. I kept it, knowing it was the only piece of evidence that could ever overturn the lease-to-own covenant. And now you want me to take it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I need you to take it, he corrected gently. I am dying, Ilara. If I pass before November, the map will be catalogued as part of my estate, and the Vances and Sterlings will make it disappear. You are the only one who can legally use it to trigger the reversal clause. The weight of the parchment suddenly felt enormous. This wasn't just land, it was a legacy, a multi-billion-dollar resource, and the entire power structure of an elite community. The Forgotten Bloodline was about to become the most important player in the town's history. I stood, adjusting my clothes, suddenly feeling the strength of my ancestry course through me. How do I trigger the clause? You must present the map and your legal lineage at the annual Founders Meeting, which is held on the exact date the Covenant Review is due, the first weekend of November. It is disguised as the Autumn Harvest Ball. Alistair's eyes held a final spark of defiance. I took the map, securing the heavy parchment under my arm. The old man watched me go, a quiet resolve in his gaze. Be careful, Ilara. The moment they realize you know about the map, you will be met with more than scorn. You will be met with the full, desperate power of a dying aristocracy. I walked out of the citadel with the most valuable document in Wisteria Heights under my arm. The outside world looked different now. The manicured lawns seemed less pristine, the expensive houses looked like fortresses, and the winding roads felt like the coils of a constricting snake. I drove back to Ariel's Point, the parchment heavy in the seat beside me, knowing that my life with Liam was over, and my war with Wisteria Heights was just beginning. The 4 months until November suddenly felt like a blink of an eye. Sitela Kebenaran yang Dinjin Itu Teran Kap, Soyo Kembali Kuruma Bu Terta Dengan Pandangan Baru. Larangan Keras Bu Terta Untuk Melihat Janaza Rendra Kini Bukan Lagi Sebuah Misteri, Melainkan Sebuah Tindakan Pelindungan yang Brutal Naman Palu. Dia Tahu Rendra Tidak Meninggal Sekra Alami, Dan Bu Terta Injin Memastikan Tidak Ada yang Melihat Tanda-Tanda Itu. Soyo Mencoba Menjingat Kembali Bu Terta. Mengapa Ia Begitu Koku? Karina Ia Harus Memegang Kendali Pinu. Ia Harus Memastikan Serata Serangan Jantung Itu Tidak Goya Sedikit Pun. Jika Soyo, Sebagai Istri yang Paling Baik, Menunjukkan Reaksi yang Berlebihan Atau Melihat Adanya Kejanggalan pada Tubuh Rendra, Seluruh Program Pelindungan dan Kebohongan yang Melindungi Kami akan Ranta. Pikiran Soyo Kembali pada Malam Pemakaman, Saat Soyo Melihat Bu Terta Berbicara dengan Pria Berpakaian Formal yang Asing. Soyo sekarang yakin pria itu adalah salah satu handler dari program pelindungan, yang datang untuk memastikan semua protokol diikuti, termasuk menyembunyikan jenazah Rendra dari mata publik, bahkan dari mata istrinya sendiri. Soyo memutuskan untuk mencari tahu lebih banyak tentang tanda-tanda yang mungkin ditinggalkan oleh Raccoon. Soyo menghubungi Maya dan memintanya untuk melakukan penelitian rahasia tentang jenis-jenis raccoon yang sering digunakan untuk meniru serangan jantung, tanpa menyebut Rendra secara langsung. Soyo juga meminta Maya mencari tahu tentang jaringan 5. Maya segera mengirimkan beberapa artikel tentang raccoon yang sulit dideteksi, yang bisa meninggalkan sedikit perubahan warna kulit, atau bekas suntikan yang sangat kesal. Tanda-tanda ini hanya bisa terlihat oleh mata yang sangat teliti, atau melalui otopsi yang ketat, yang pasti sudah disiga oleh Bu Terta dan handler program. Ketika Soyo melihat Bu Terta, Soyo tidak lagi merasakan kemarahan, tetapi empati yang mendalam. Dia adalah seorang ibu yang harus mengubur anaknya dan pada saat yang sama, berbohong kepada menantunya sendiri untuk menjaga keselamatan menantunya. Beban itu pasti tak terbayangkan. Namun, pengakuan Dimas dan penjelasan bapak saya juga meneratkan bahwa mereka mungkin telah gagal. Rendra mati. Dan jika jaringan 5 bisa menemukannya, mereka juga bisa menemukan Soyo. Rumah ini, yang seharusnya menjadi tempat pelindungan, kini terasa seperti sangka terbuka. Soyo mulai memperhatikan hal-hal kesal di rumah yang sebelumnya Soyo anggap sepil. Lampu yang padam di ruang tamu di saat-saat tertentu. Sebuah mobil hitam yang selalu diparkir di ujung jalan. Dan yang paling penting, Soyo Tarangat Bu Tertapanam Aminta Demas Memasang System Kimanan Boru, Padahol Ruma Ini Suda Sangitaman. Soyo Mulai Minkari Bhakti Physic Bawa Ruma Ini Teladisusupi, Tidak Hanya Ol Musa, Tetapi Juga Ol Bu Terta Sendiri, Sebagai Bagian Dari Protocol Kimanan Yang Ekstrom. Kikiragan Soyo Terhadap Ruma Besar Bu Terta Semakin Memangkak. Soyo Menyadari Bawa Bu Terta, Meskipun Bertindak Sebagai Ibu Mertua Yang Koku, Sebenarnya Adalah Seorang Penjaga. Jika Rendra Adalah Subjek Yang Dilindungi, Bu Terta Pasti Mematuhi Sishap Protokol Yang Diberikan Ol Program Pelindungan. Soyo Mulai Dari Ruang Tamu, Tempat Kami Seeing Bo Bikara. Soyo Memorik Sabingkai Foto, Pot Bunga, Dan Lampu Hias. Semuanya Tampak Normal, Tetapi Soyo Ingat Dimas Sangat Gugup Sishap Kali Soyo Mulai Bo Bikara Tentang Rendra Atau Kamasianya. Apakah dia takut Soyo Mengungkapkan sesuatu? Soyo Memeriksa Lampu Hias Kuno Yang Terpasang di Dinding, Dekat Dengan Sofa Tempat Bu Terta Siring Duduk. Itu adalah lampu dengan ukuran kayu yang rumit. Soyo mengamati bagian bawah ukuran kayu itu. Soyo harus memanjat kursi untuk mengkapainya. Dengan hati-hati, Soyo menyentuh salah satu ukuran yang paling gelap. Tangan Soyo merasakan adanya sila kesel, seolah-olah ada penutup kesel yang disamakan dengan sempurna. Dengan menggunakan penjepit rambut, Soyo berhasil mengkongkol penutup itu. Di dalamnya, tersembunyi sebuah lensa kesel, hampir tidak terlihat, yang mengira langsung ke ruang tengah. Itu adalah kamera tersembunyi. Jantung Soyo berdebar kencang. Soyo segera mundur. Bu Terta memasang kamera di ruang tamu. Tapi untuk apa? Untuk memati Soyo? Atau untuk mengawasi siapa saja yang datang dan pergi? Soyo berpikir kembali pada penjelasan Dimas. Dimas adalah satu-satunya orang yang Bu Terta izinkan untuk membantu mengurus Rendra. Dimas tampak selalu gugup. Soyo menyadari, kamera ini mungkin bukan dipasang oleh jaringan 5 untuk mengawasi kami, tetapi dipasang oleh Dimas atas perintah Bu Terta. Bu Terta dan Dimas tahu Soyo akan mencoba mencari tahu kebenaran. Kamera ini adalah cara Bu Terta untuk memantau apakah Soyo melakukan kontak dengan pihak luar, seperti yang dilakukan Rendra, atau apakah Soyo mulai bertanya terlalu banyak. Mereka tidak ingin Soyo tahu rahasia Rendra, tetapi mereka juga perlu tahu sejauh mana Soyo mengetahui. Soyo menyentuh lensa kamera itu, dan merasakan campuran kemarahan dan rasa kasihan. Bu Terta telah menjalani hidup yang penuh kepalsuan dan ketakutan selama bertahun-tahun. Dia telah menjadi agen rahasia tanpa mau. Soyo memutuskan untuk membiarkan kamera itu tetap di tempatnya. Soyo akan mulai bersikap seolah-olah Soyo sudah menerima kemasian Rendra dan tidak lagi mencari tahu. Ini akan menenangkan Bu Terta dan memberi Soyo waktu untuk melaksanakan rencana Soyo. Soyo menjerim pesan kepada bapak suya, mengatakan bahwa Soyo harus bertemu dengannya lagi, secepatnya. Soyo harus memindahkan semua bukti yang Soyo miliki, termasuk surat-surat itu, ke tempat yang aman. Soyo menyadari, rumah ini adalah penjara yang aman, tetapi Soyo tidak bisa hidup dalam penjara. Returning to Ariel's point felt like walking into enemy territory. Liam was waiting, his face tight with worry and suspicion. The note I had left was burning a hole in his mind, and the sight of me holding the rolled-up parchment confirmed his worst fears. "Where were you? What did Thorn give you?" he demanded, rushing to meet me at the foyer, his tone shifting quickly from concern to authoritative command. He reached for the map. I instinctively stepped back, placing the parchment behind me. I was at the Citadel. Mr. Thorn showed me the original Eldridge survey map, and he confirmed that I am the direct heir of the Eldridge line. I delivered the sentence like a clean, surgical cut. Liam stopped dead, his hand still outstretched. "The map? No, that's impossible. that was destroyed decades ago. Ilara, you're not going to be crazy about this, are you? It's a piece of paper, a historical anomaly. We can manage this. Manage this? I repeated, my voice rising in incredulity. Liam, the town your ancestors built is sitting on wealth they stole from mine. And you think we can manage this by continuing the lie? The map felt like a shield, not just a document. It wasn't stolen, it was acquired through legal means, he yelled back, his composure finally dissolving. They ran their company into the ground. My great-grandfather saved the community from ruin. This is about order, Ilara. Not some ancient, romanticized claim. It's about stability built on fraud, I corrected him calmly. I know the covenant review date is in November. I know the map proves the mineral deposits are intact, directly beneath the club. I will present this, and the land will revert to the Eldridge heir. He paled, realizing the depth of my knowledge and, more importantly, the steel in my resolve. You can't. Ilara, if you do this, you will destroy everything. Not just our marriage, but the Vance name. They will make sure you are utterly ruined. I am already ruined, Liam, I said, the sadness of the moment finally hitting me. I was ruined the moment Kai Sterling stood in the middle of that room and publicly labeled me as not one of us. Now, I am simply reclaiming what is mine. That night, Liam moved to the guest wing. The ice wall between us was now complete, impenetrable, formed from a century of his family's entitlement and my sudden, undeniable truth. I knew then that I could no longer trust him. His loyalty was clearly with the established order. The next few weeks were an exercise in quiet warfare. Liam tried persuasion, then bribery, offering to buy me a distant property to start fresh, and finally, cold legal pressure. His lawyers sent cease and desist letters, claiming the map was fabricated and my claim libelous. But I was prepared. I hired my own attorney, a sharp, independent woman from outside Wisteria Heights who specialized in complex land covenants. We worked in secret, building my lineage proof from my mother's old birth certificates and my grandmother's sparse, but crucial, records. The town's silence also broke, replaced by a new, focused hostility. The matriarchs sent their proxies, their daughters-in-law, who politely, but coldly, informed me that I was no longer invited to any social function. I was a pariah, not because I was poor, but because I was dangerous. I saw Kai Sterling once at the grocery store. He simply looked at me, gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod of warning, and then quickly hurried away. He wasn't gloating, he was terrified. He was no longer the threat, he was just a pawn in the larger game. The pressure mounted. One night, my car's brakes mysteriously failed. Another time, the old ledger I had found in the library, the one mentioning the seal of silence, vanished from my locked desk. They were escalating, moving from social rejection to overt sabotage. I knew they were watching my every move, waiting for me to make a mistake, waiting for the November deadline. The only safe place was within the thick, stone walls of Ariel's Point, and even that was becoming tenuous. I felt the full, suffocating weight of an entire aristocracy bearing down on me, trying to push me back into the oblivion from which I had emerged. I tightened security on the Eldridge map, storing it in a safe deposit box miles away from Wisteria Heights, with only my new attorney and me knowing the location. The attempts at intimidation continued, growing more sophisticated and unnerving. It was clear that the club was mobilizing its full resources. My attorney, Ms. Chen, confirmed the legal standing of the covenant. It's ironclad, Ilara. Convoluted, but ironclad. The failure of the bloodline is the key phrase. If you can prove you are the living, legal heir, the reversion clause is triggered, and the land reverts to you. The only weak link was the Eldridge map itself. If the club could successfully argue it was a forgery or irrelevant to the covenant, they could maintain their ownership. I needed independent verification of the map's geological claims. I remembered a small, specialist geology firm I had seen referenced in one of Liam's older business reports, a firm far from Wisteria Heights' sphere of influence. I contacted them under an assumed name, asking for an appraisal of a generic coastal New England land parcel. The head geologist, a serious, unassuming woman named Dr. Reese, agreed to meet. I flew to her office, carrying only a meticulously traced copy of the Eldridge map, omitting the Wisteria Heights Club location itself. The actual names and locations were coded. Dr. Reese spent an hour analyzing the tracing. She confirmed the mineral deposit was incredibly rich and, crucially, that the unique geological signatures matched only a specific, narrow stretch of the Massachusetts coast. The Eldridge map was genuine, accurate, and pointed to a massive, untapped reserve. Armed with Dr. Reese's independent, coded appraisal, I felt a new surge of confidence. The evidence was overwhelming. The only thing left to do was wait for the autumn harvest ball, the founders' meeting. During this time, I started reviewing the old Vance ledgers again, looking for any sign of a betrayal that went deeper than I thought. I found something unsettling, a series of consistent, large cash payments made by the Vance patriarch, not to the Eldridges, but to a lawyer named G. Sterling, Kai's grandfather, in the year the covenant was signed. The payments coincided exactly with the time Lillian Eldridge supposedly vanished and was declared lost to the line by the club. It was a smoking gun, suggesting a much deeper, more personal conspiracy than a mere land deal. They didn't just swindle the Eldridges, they may have actively forced them out. My discovery was interrupted by a desperate call from Liam. He sounded frantic, cornered. "Ilara, they know you're fighting. Sterling is calling for an emergency club meeting. They're going to use the community fund to launch a multi-million-dollar campaign to discredit you before November. They are preparing a moral turpitude clause against your mother's past to invalidate your claim." "My mother's past?" I asked, my blood turning to ice. "My mother was a saint, a gentle academic. What are you talking about?" "It's a lie, but it's a powerful one," Liam stammered. "They're claiming she was disreputable, mentally unstable, trying to taint your legal lineage. Ilara, please, just walk away. Let me give you 10 million, and you leave the town, never look back." I felt nauseous, not from the threat of ruin, but from the realization of their cruelty. They were willing to desecrate the memory of a good woman just to hold on to their stolen wealth. My resolve hardened into granite. "No, Liam," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. "Tell them to save their money. I will see them in November. And tell Kai Sterling I found his grandfather's ledgers." I hung up the phone, knowing I had just declared total, irreversible war. The weeks leading up to the autumn harvest ball were a blur of intense preparation. Miss Chen and I drafted the legal challenge, a full, comprehensive package citing the covenant, the lineage proof, and Dr. Reese's independent geological assessment. We were going for the shock factor, keeping the Eldridge map's existence a complete secret. The town, meanwhile, hummed with a toxic energy. The matriarchs were visibly agitated, their carefully curated composure fraying under the strain. They gave me wide berths, but their stares were weapons. I was the silent, acknowledged enemy of their entire way of life. I continued to live at Ariel's Point, occupying the house as a sort of defiant ghost. Liam had moved out entirely, checking into a city apartment, a physical representation of his betrayal and fear. He had chosen the side of stability over truth, tradition over his wife. I spent my final days reviewing the details of the original Eldridge survey map. Alistair Thorne had not mentioned this, but the map contained a small, hand-drawn symbol near the location of the mineral deposit, an inverted V with a small circle beneath it. It was too stylized to be a geographical marker. I finally realized what it was, the Eldridge family motto. The inverted V stood for veritas, truth, and the circle for orbis, world whole. It was a quiet signature, a subtle boast of the truth held beneath the world. The night before the ball, I sat alone in the massive dining room of Ariel's Point, eating a simple, solitary meal. The house, usually a comfort, felt cold and mocking, reminding me of all the expectations I had failed to meet and the life I was about to destroy. I felt a pang of profound loneliness, but also an exhilarating sense of purpose. I received a final, desperate plea from Liam via email. "Ilara, don't do this. I've offered you everything. If you walk into that room tomorrow with your claim, the club will find a way to crush you and my name will be irrevocably tainted. I beg you, for the sake of your own peace, let this sleeping dog lie." I deleted the email without responding. Peace was no longer the goal, justice was. The Eldridge lineage had waited a century for this day. I wouldn't let them down. The day of the autumn harvest ball arrived, a grey, blustery day, fitting for the impending storm. I chose a dress with deliberate intention, not the latest European couture preferred by the matriarchs, but a stunning, simple silver gown that was a nod to the color of the sea and the old silver of the Eldridge crest. I looked like an iceberg, beautiful, cold, and utterly immovable. I placed my grandmother's pearl earring in my ear, the small, unadorned gem now feeling like a talisman of ancient power. My reflection showed not Liam's wife, but Ilara Eldridge, ready to reclaim her inheritance. Ms. Chen met me at the door, carrying a slender briefcase containing the lineage documents and Dr. Reese's coded report. The Eldridge map itself remained safely in the vault, to be retrieved only if the situation demanded the ultimate, irrefutable proof. "Ready?" Ms. Chen asked, her eyes sparkling with professional excitement. "As I'll ever be," I replied, feeling the adrenaline flood my system. We stepped into the waiting car, the engine starting with a powerful, almost aggressive roar. The drive to the Wisteria Heights Club, usually 5 pleasant minutes, felt like the final journey to the gallows, or perhaps, to the throne. The Wisteria Heights Club was ablaze with light. Hundreds of lanterns and strategically placed uplights transformed the grim granite structure into a glittering facade of wealth. The parking lot was filled with luxury vehicles, and the faint, elegant sound of a string orchestra drifted on the chill autumn air. As Miss Chen and I walked up the marble steps, flanked by towering bronze planters, I felt the familiar weight of scrutiny immediately settle upon me. But this time, it was different. It wasn't simple judgment. It was a complex blend of fear, loathing, and desperate, agonizing curiosity. The moment I stepped inside the ballroom, the whispers stopped. I walked past the check-in table, where the usual hostess was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a stern, unfamiliar security guard. The guard's eyes widened when he saw me, but he had no instructions to stop me. The matriarchs, Mrs. Albright, Mrs. Sterling, Mrs. Hawthorne, were seated at a prominent table near the fireplace. They stared at me, their faces carefully blank, but the tension radiating from them was enough to heat the entire room. I paused, allowing the silence to stretch, and then walked directly to their table. Ms. Chen followed discreetly, holding her briefcase. "Ladies," I greeted them, my voice polite and impossibly calm. "I trust you're enjoying the last ball before the ownership structure of this establishment fundamentally changes." Mrs. Albright recovered first. "Ilara, you have no business being here. Liam told us he could manage you, but clearly, he failed." Her tone was venomous, a final declaration of war. "Liam chose his side, Mrs. Albright," I countered, resting my hand lightly on the back of an empty chair. "And I chose mine. I am here for the founders' meeting, which I believe begins promptly at 8. "You are not a founder," Mrs. Sterling spat, her usually pristine expression marred by a flash of rage. "You are an interloper, and we have prepared a legal injunction to have you removed. You have no right to attend." Ms. Chen smoothly stepped forward, placing a thick stack of papers on the table. "With respect, Mrs. Sterling, the Eldridge line is cited in the original 1905 charter. My client, Ms. Ilara Vance, as the confirmed direct heir of that line, is legally entitled to attend the review meeting. Any attempt to forcibly remove her will result in an immediate, public filing of the reversion suit. The matriarchs froze, their eyes fixed on the legal papers. They knew I wasn't bluffing, they were facing a legal earthquake. Their entire strategy, discredit me, then remove me, had just failed at the first hurdle. Suddenly, Kai Sterling appeared, threading through the crowd. He looked haggard, his face unshaven, but his eyes held that familiar, desperate resolve. He ignored the matriarchs and stopped directly in front of me. "You didn't listen," he stated, his voice a low growl of disappointment. "I told you to go home. I told you what they are capable of. You don't understand how deep the rot goes, Ilara. This isn't just about the land. It's about them." He gestured vaguely to the whole room. "It is about my family's land, Kai," I replied, standing my ground. "And my family's name. I understand exactly what it's about." I looked him over, seeing the broken gatekeeper, the pawn who had overplayed his hand. He shook his head slowly. "No, you don't. You have the map, you have the proof, but you don't have the final piece." He lowered his voice, the sound barely audible over the orchestra's pleasant notes. "The man who is about to walk in here, he is the one who made the final agreement with your great-grandmother. He knows the ultimate sacrifice." Before I could ask what he meant, Kai straightened up, his eyes suddenly shifting from desperate warning to sheer, unadulterated terror. He was looking past my shoulder, toward the main entrance, his face draining of color until it was the shade of the polished marble floor. "Oh, God," he whispered, a sound of utter defeat, and then he backed away rapidly, melting into the crowd. I turned, my heart hammering, expecting the arrival of the ultimate lawyer or the final security enforcer. I expected a rival, a man of power. The orchestra abruptly stopped mid-phrase. The sudden silence was so absolute that I could hear the faint sound of the Atlantic wind rattling the windows. Everyone in the ballroom, from the cocktail waiters to the matriarchs, turned their eyes to the main entrance, their expressions mirroring Kai Sterling's abject horror. I turned too, expecting the arrival of a figure of immense wealth or political clout, the ultimate heavy. But the person who walked in was unremarkable, even ordinary, at first glance. He was middle-aged, perhaps in his late 50s, dressed not in a tuxedo, but in a simple, well-worn tweed suit. He looked like a university professor or a retired librarian. He carried no briefcase, only a small, elegant box made of dark, aged wood. His face was kind, lined with worry, and he possessed a quiet, almost mournful dignity. He did not look powerful, yet his presence instantly commanded the room. He walked slowly, his eyes sweeping over the frozen crowd, and finally settling on me. His gaze was not hostile, but intensely, tragically familiar. I felt a sudden, cold wave of recognition, a primal instinct that bypassed logic. I had never seen this man before, yet every cell in my body knew him. The matriarchs at the fireplace table were openly weeping now, not in sorrow, but in what looked like utter, terrified resignation. Mrs. Albright lifted a trembling hand to her mouth, stifling a choked sob. The man kept walking, slowly, deliberately, towards me. He passed Liam, who had just entered the room and was frozen mid-stride, his expression utterly bewildered. The man didn't spare Liam a glance. He stopped directly in front of me, placing the small wooden box on a nearby pedestal table. He looked down at the box, then back up at my face, his eyes full of the same weary defiance Alistair Thorne had mentioned. He didn't speak the Eldridge family motto. He didn't issue a threat or a legal demand. He simply said one word, his voice clear, resonant, and heartbreakingly familiar. "Ilara." My composure, which had survived Kai's venom and Liam's betrayal, finally cracked. The recognition was too powerful, too immediate to deny. The same angles, the same set to the jaw, the same kind, tired eyes, only older, sadder. "Mother," I whispered, my voice thick with disbelief and a sudden, aching grief. My mother, who had supposedly died quietly in my hometown, who had been my sole parent, my constant. The man flinched slightly at the word mother. He looked around the room, which remained perfectly silent, every individual still locked in their stunned, frozen poses. He returned his gaze to me. "No, Ilara," he said gently, shaking his head. "I am not your mother. I am your father." The gasp that escaped me was sharp, almost a cry. My father, who my mother had told me died in a climbing accident before I was born. My father, whose absence had been the defining silence of my childhood. "Gideon," Mrs. Sterling wailed from her table, confirming the impossible truth. He nodded once, accepting the name, the history, the pain. Gideon Eldridge. The son of Lillian. The one they claimed was lost to the line. The one they forced my mother to protect. The man who had just arrived, the man who had caused everyone to freeze, was the actual, forgotten heir. I was the second generation, the granddaughter, but he, Gideon, was the son. The revelation that my deceased mother's story was a lie, and that the man standing before me was my living father, the actual, legitimate heir, was a shock so profound it eclipsed the entire Eldridge land covenant. I didn't care about the land, I cared only about the man who stood before me, the silent observer of my life. "You're alive," I managed to articulate, the words catching in my throat. "All these years, why? Why the lie? Why did my mother tell me you died?" Gideon, my father, opened the small wooden box on the pedestal. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a single, aged photograph, not of Lillian Eldridge, but of a young woman who looked exactly like my mother, smiling radiantly, standing next to a younger Gideon. "Your mother was everything to me, Ilara. We met far from here, living simple, honest lives. But the covenant was always a shadow," he explained, his voice gaining a clear, professorial cadence, as if delivering the final, painful lecture. "When Lillian, my mother, your grandmother, fled, she had to ensure the failure of the bloodline clause was not triggered prematurely. The terms were specific. If the original heir, me, returned with proof of the mineral before the review date, the property reverted, but the club could still challenge the claim based on character or moral turpitude." He looked pointedly at the matriarchs, who were utterly defeated. "They would have destroyed us. They would have used their influence to claim I was unstable, or that your mother, who was unconventional, was unfit to raise a child. So, my mother told me you died, to protect me?" I asked, a wave of understanding washing over the anger. "No," Gideon shook his head. "She told you I died to protect the covenant. She knew the club was watching. She knew they tracked every Eldridge descendant. Your mother wasn't just hiding me, she was creating a lost line of descent that they would deem harmless." He looked at the Eldridge map I had brought, which Miss Chen now held protectively. "The club expected the heir to be me, Gideon Eldridge, to come back with the map. If I came back, they could fight me. But they never expected the granddaughter, you, Ilara, who was completely off their radar, to marry into the very family who held the deeds, the Vances." He gestured to me. "Your marriage to Liam gave you access to the club's records and the original covenant, the very documents I, as the known heir, could never have gotten my hands on. You were their ultimate blind spot, an unknown variable with access to the highest level of security." "Kai Sterling didn't yell you're not one of us because you were poor or common," Gideon stated, his voice ringing with quiet finality. "He yelled it because he knew the Eldridge bloodline was not supposed to marry a Vance. He was shouting at the irony, the incredible danger you represented by having both Eldridge blood and Vance access." He finally looked at the matriarchs. "We created the ultimate failsafe. Your mother and I agreed. I would live in secret, protecting the map's location, and she would raise you, the true, unexpected challenger, outside the system. I watched you grow up, Ilara, from a distance, knowing you had the strength to face them." I finally understood Alistair Thorne's intervention. He hadn't been identifying me as the heir, He had been warning the club that the Eldridge line had returned, and that the person they were humiliating was actually the person who had managed to breach their defenses. He had protected my access. Gideon looked at the matriarchs. The covenant is due. My daughter, Elara Vance, is ready to file the reversion clause. He placed his hands on the small wooden box. And this is the final piece, the original, signed deed from Lillian Eldridge, containing the clause that nullifies the entire covenant if the club is found to be complicit in the intentional, financial ruin of the Eldridge name. He looked at Mrs. Albright, and then at Liam, who was slowly, numbly walking toward us. The time for stability is over. The time for truth has arrived. The silence in the Wisteria Heights Club ballroom was broken only by the sound of Liam Vance, my husband, finally collapsing into a chair, the weight of his family's century of deceit finally crushing him. He looked up at Gideon, then at me, the powerful sign reduced to a devastated child. Gideon waited, allowing the gravity of his arrival and his explanation to fully sink in. The matriarchs remained defeated, their entire power structure dismantled by the truth and the presence of the man they had believed long gone. You knew, I whispered to Gideon, a realization dawning on me. You knew I was marrying Liam. I knew Liam was a Vance, Gideon admitted, a pained expression crossing his face. But I also knew Liam. He is structured, predictable. He would never look at the covenant. Your mother and I gambled that your nature, your curiosity, your sense of justice, would force you to dig, once you were safely inside the walls. We gambled that Liam's stability would be your key, not your prison. It was a cold, calculated love, a sacrifice that meant a lifetime of solitude for my father and a childhood of half-truths for me, all to ensure the Eldridge legacy survived the rapacious greed of Wisteria Heights. Ms. Chen seized the moment, stepping forward and speaking to the room in a sharp, authoritative voice that brooked no argument. The reversion claim is officially filed. Based on the lineage of Mr. Gideon Eldridge and his daughter, Ms. Elara Vance, and the evidence of intentional conspiracy, the Eldridge land, and thus the entire Wisteria Heights Club property, reverts ownership immediately. She looked at the security guard. You are now serving a new owner. The club is officially closed, pending a full audit. The matriarchs didn't protest. They were too beaten, too exposed. The long reign of the founding families, built on a mountain of stolen mineral wealth, had ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, undeniable legal decree delivered by the woman they had labeled an outsider. I looked at Liam. He was shattered, the perfect veneer of his life cracked wide open. Liam, I said, my voice empty of malice, only a profound weariness. Your family's name is tied to this land. You can choose to fight this, or you can choose to cooperate. But know that the marriage is over. He simply nodded, incapable of speaking. Gideon placed his hand gently on my shoulder. You did well, Elara. The defiance runs deep. Over the next few months, the truth unfolded like a toxic flower. The club's power dissolved entirely. The Vance, Sterling, and Albright families were forced to reconcile with the fact that their massive estates were now essentially sitting on land owned by the woman they had scorned. I, Elara Vance, now Elara Eldridge, found myself not just accepted, but owning the acceptance. I was the new, legitimate power of Wisteria Heights, inheriting not just the mineral wealth, but the formidable, ancient authority of the Eldridge name. I never moved back to Ariel's Point. Instead, I funded a trust to convert the Wisteria Heights Club into a genuine public institution, a center for marine science and local history, ensuring the mineral wealth was developed responsibly for the benefit of the wider community. Kai Sterling sent me a single, short letter. The man who yelled, "You're not one of us," was right. You're better than us. You're the foundation. My father and I began the slow, necessary work of rebuilding our relationship, a bond formed not in gentle domesticity, but in the white-hot crucible of legal and social warfare. He was the quiet strength, I was the visible champion. The tale of the woman who was publicly shamed only to become the owner of the place that rejected her became the viral story of the year, the ultimate tale of the outsider winning the game. I stood on the highest point of the peninsula, overlooking the Atlantic, no longer Liam's wife, no longer an outsider, but the Eldridge heir. The wind was cold, but for the first time in my life, I felt truly, irrevocably home.